In this episode of the Toolbox, we're going to talk about some of the coolest new features in Bootstrap 5.1, like support for placeholders and stacks. In Toolbox Shorts, we've got an amazing search engine for developers and a big change on how Google indexes titles, plus demos of how to streamline your query selectors, what's quite possibly the next big thing in CSS development. It's Wednesday, September 8th, 1 p.m. Eastern Time, and this is episode 6. So let's get tooling. Hello, everyone. This is Ravi Villalobos, and I stream about front end and full stack tools Wednesday at 1 p.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Pacific. So follow me and subscribe on the social media things for tons more content. If you want to watch any past episodes, make sure you take a look at my blog, raybo.org. So we're going to get started with some Toolbox shorts. These are tools or information about what's going on the web, stuff that I think you find useful. So we'll start off with this new pretty cool, awesome thing called Source Graph. So this is a search engine for coders, and it has some pretty cool features that I haven't seen before. So you can see some of the examples right here. So you can take a look at the diffs in your specific repo in the last week that you have done that have a to-do element in them. So it's more than the type of searches that you would do in something like Google. It's specifically for perhaps finding your own code or finding some code on GitHub. It has things like, for example, wildcards that you can use. You can use regular expressions to search for things and all kinds of stuff that you are not going to be able to find elsewhere. So it looks like there is sort of a free version, and there's also another way that you can monitor and change things if you want to with additional extensions. So it looks pretty awesome. You can already use just this part right here. So that is the first sort of toolbox item. All right, let's take a look. This was pretty interesting to me. Google search engine just updated the way that they generate the page titles. They are still taking into account page titles, but they now use some sort of genius unicorn magic to show a title based on the content of the page. And that's pretty cool. I think that one of the problems with a lot of search engines today, and I'm totally guilty of this, is that people tend to stuff their page titles with a lot of keywords just to sort of try to rank higher. So Google is using some AI to analyze what people are actually typing, and then also redefining the title that people will find when they search for an item and, deciding sort of a new title based on, what the content of the page actually is. And you can read more about it in here. There's also links to other explanations of what they're doing. They're calling this beyond the tag. And here's the reasons that sometimes they're very long. There's stuff with keywords, and sometimes they lack title tags. It's difficult to actually programmatically add those in. So if you don't do that, then you get sort of default titles for everything. So this means that they're actually going to analyze the content and try to serve, a version of the title that they think best represents the content that you have on your page. I think that's pretty cool, but it's definitely something to watch out for. So let's take a look at the next shorts. And this is one that I have been using. Elgato has been making a lot of amazing things lately. I have a lot of their products. So I have a few of their little lights. So you can see there's like a red cast over here, and I have like a blue one back here. And then I have another one over here. So I like that. And I have the Stream Deck, as I mentioned. And one of the cool sort of features of the Stream Deck is this little URL where you can create your own icon. So you can, if you want to import an icon, just grab an icon, and it has a pretty cool interface. So if you're designing an icon, especially buttons for things, you can kind of use this to help you design them. You can just pick one from the library here, or if you want to, you can import one from your desktop. So for Stream Deck icons, I think this works pretty cool, but I think you can possibly use these for other things. So yeah, check this out. I thought this page was a little bit, or rather quite useful for me. So in addition to that, I didn't even know that this is a thing actually until I started using, using the Stream Deck. So there's also this thing called SmartCrop.js, an interesting sort of experimental project to help you create, croppings that are context sensitive. So it analyzes what is most relevant in a page and crops the image. This is a problem that we'll have when you're using a lot of automation to generate different size images. You end up with images that don't quite fit in the placeholder. So this is an attempt to create a JavaScript library that has a little bit of artificial intelligence that can take care of that. That I thought was pretty awesome. So it's a bit in the early stages, but it looks promising. And it essentially it crops the image to the, a size that makes sense, in other words. All right, so let's take a look really quick at some of the Q&A before we get started with the demos. So, all right, so I have one here from Paramasivan. What is the simplest way of converting from 4 to 5.1? And there is no simple way of doing this. It's actually quite difficult. I think the 3 to 4 upgrade was a lot easier than the 4 to 5 upgrade. And there's a couple of main things that you're going to have to watch out for. Number one is the RTL support. So the right to left support. Normally Bootstrap is designed, like most of at least the old versions of CSS, to read from left to right. Recently, they've been adding some right to left support to support different languages. And that's a great thing. But what it does practically is that anytime that you've used paddings or margins or anything that has a left and right component to it, it means that you're going to have to upgrade that. So you're going to notice that if you just change out the script tag, you'll notice that it's not going to display how you expect it to. That's sort of the main thing. And I think jQuery is going to be an issue. I think you can still, I don't know if you can still load jQuery, but definitely the switch from jQuery to JavaScript means that you're going to have to rewrite some of your old scripts, especially if you do anything custom. If you don't do custom things and you're just using the plain version of the library, then it's going to be pretty much the same. There's a lot of things to watch out for. I do have a course that's coming really soon, should be within the next few weeks, on what you need to watch out very specifically for migration, and then also some of the new features. And that's kind of what I wanted to talk about today, the new features in the version, not just 5.0, but version 5.1. So 5.0, actually, the big things were, of course, jQuery, as well as, the change to RTL. And there was a lot of smaller things. in the update, but there wasn't a lot of new components, not a lot of new things that you could really use. So in this version 5.1, they added a few components that I think are pretty interesting. So we're going to take a look at that. And the first component that I'll talk about is accordion. So this is, you could do accordions before, but it was a little bit cumbersome. Accordions is a great way of letting you put a lot of content in a limited area. So this essentially, if you click right here, you'll see that when I click on a new segment of an accordion, it hides the other one, which is pretty useful. And it allows me to have all this content in a very sort of small vertical area. Now you can, I think, make them horizontal. They are quite possibly the most complex component to build. It has a lot of different parts to it. I have this template, and I'll have, if you go to rabo.org, there's already an article there that has all the notes for this show. I wonder what happens if I press this. It'll probably look, it's actually, it's sort of like watching, what is that, Spaceballs? It's showing me a little bit ago. Yeah, there's already links to all of the stuff that I'm talking about, to all of the shorts. And also there are links to all of the code pens, and I've embedded them in there for you. So don't worry if you see something, all the URLs are right here on this article, and it's just rabo.org, which is my blog. So let's go back into the accordion code right here. It looks a little bit different because I'm logged into CodePen right now, and that's what I'm using. So one way to condense a lot of data is through the use of accordions. It's probably, like I said, one of the hardest components to get working because there are so many different pieces to it. So you could see that, for example, if we break this down, you have a main container, and the main container has a class of accordion. The container needs an ID, so you have to add this ID in here. And then you have different accordion items. So you have as many items as you have elements for. So you can see this is the second element, actually. And then this will be the first element, right? So these each get an individual class inside the bigger container. And then inside each one of those containers, you need to have the top section right here, which is the header. That gets an ID as well, right? So this gets an ID, a unique ID, and a class of accordion header. And then this top section, since it's going to act as a button, you're going to need to add a class of accordion button and some additional pieces here. So you have to say data collapse. So this, as in newer versions of Bootstrap, you don't have to use any JavaScript. So you tend to activate things with these data attributes. One of the nice things that they did is that they actually changed the names of the data attributes so that they have this BS prefix to it. So it's a little bit easier to target them, and it's also easier to not get them confused with other elements or other data attributes on your page by adding this data sort of BS. So by using this, you're saying that this element is a collapsible element, and it's also a button, of course. And then here you say, I want to target what I want to expand in the accordion. So here we have an ID of regular collapse first, and then some area properties that you need here. And then, of course, the text that goes in the button. And then, of course, you're targeting this element called regular collapse first. And so that also goes in the area controls, but you can see it right over here as well. So this is the part that gets collapsed, right? And then this gets a class of accordion collapse, collapse, and show. So the show is, if you don't have this show, then that element will not show when the page loads. So you can have the elements collapsed when the page loads. That's what that is for. And then you put in an element, the accordion body. What's difficult about this is that there's so many places where you have to wire things up that it is a little bit challenging to get it all working. So I think that the way that I designed this particular example is to make it easier for you to copy this and then like add another accordion item, right? So what you want to do is you want to like grab this one if you wanted to create a third item, and then copy and paste it, and then replace, pretty much find do a select here, and then look for the next element with the same name. And then notice that I call these like regular heading, second, second, second. So I tried to design it easier than the example that you get on the Bootstrap page for you to sort of modify and add things to it. I think sometimes the examples on the website, as fantastic as they are, they aren't sort of designed to be reused. So I think this is a pretty cool component. So let's talk about, hello everyone. I see a lot of people. So next up, let's talk about there's actually another option called the flush accordion. So this is if you wanted to have an accordion and maybe something like a card, or I don't know if you would put an accordion in navigation, but if you wanted to have no borders and no padding so that it goes all the way to the edge. And so you can see the border here goes all the way to the edge. Let's go ahead and hide myself to just give this thing maximum view. Let's see if I can make this a little bit bigger. Yeah. So you can see that this goes all the way to the edge of the container. Remember that because I have a container class on this entire page, that you're not getting it flush with the edge of the page because it's aligning to that container. So the way that you do that is just by adding this accordion flush class to this. No big deal, but I think it's a pretty cool component. Accordions are pretty useful. Now, the next thing that we saw, and this is actually a Bootstrap 5 feature, is something called the off canvas component. So the way that this one works is you click on this, a button on the page, and it'll slide in a component from any one of the sides that you want, right? So you can click right here to sort of uncheck it. You can click on the close box, and you can, while this is up, you can actually click on these and go to any part of the page. Now, one thing that I thought is weird is when you click away, it kind of scrolls you back to the top of the page, which, okay, that, that's something to watch out for if you don't want that to happen, I guess. So in here, we take a look at the structure of this thing. So there's actually a couple of parts. Of course, there is sort of the button, which activates the thing that you want to show and hide, right? So we have this button right here. And you can see that just like with the accordion, we have this data BS, and in this case, toggle. Actually, the other one had toggles too. So this data BS toggle says that you are toggling an off-canvas component, right? And then we're identifying the target of the toggle is going to be this thing called robot index, which you can see right here. So this is the container for the thing that you're showing, right? And then there's a bunch of area commands. So for screen readers, you can see all of the code that you add right there. And then in here, you can have a header section. So, and you should have actually this header section. Let's go ahead and show this. So this header allows you to put this close button right here, this close button. Although you don't have to use it, I think it's nice and maybe like important because some people might not know that you know how you close this. So you can also hit the escape key, and it's configurable so you can turn some of those things off. You essentially have to should create this header, although it is optional. And then in here, you identify this as the heading, and also add a button that has, so the buttons are actually a different component, but you use them all the time. And the important thing is that you're going to say that this dismisses an off-canvas component, right? Here we're just saying that this is a close button. All right, so in addition to this button, you're going to create the section that has the actual content. And here you just give it a class of off-canvas body and put whatever you want in here. So it doesn't matter what you put in here. Anything you want goes into that section. And that is your off-canvas component. I just added some content here at the bottom so that you could see that there is some content. And when you pull this up, it appears. So this is I think probably my favorite new addition to Bootstrap, but they have actually added a brand new thing in version 5.1, and you can now use these in navigation elements. So I really love this. Let me show you how this works. So let's go over to the next example. So this is the way that navigation in the old days, like 5.0 and before, whenever your screen got sort of shorter, let's make sure that, let's see, what do I have back here? I have some YouTube stuff back there. All right, so whenever you make this shorter, it would switch over to this hamburger menu, right? And in this hamburger menu, you would click on this and it would show and hide this little section. Well, now with the off canvas component, when you click on this, it slides in an off canvas component, which is different. I'm not sure if it's better, but it's definitely cooler. It could be because it's easier. So that I like this feature. And it's pretty similar. I mean, so if you take a look at the old navigation, navigation gets pretty complex in here. You have the button has a class of navbar toggler and the data BS toggle of collapse. And if you take a look at the other button, so this is the one for the off canvas component. So instead of the data BS toggle has off canvas. So if we, let's see, we can, so this one, the top one says collapse and the new one, the new version says off canvas. Other than that, I think it's pretty similar. Also, the other difference is that you do have this container div. So it's sort of more like creating an off canvas component. And what you do is you put the navigation inside the body. So notice that if we look at this code, you can see that we have this button up here, right? And it's a navbar toggler, just like before, just like the old navigation. This looks similar. But instead of normally you would put the navigation right here in this section. With this new off-canvas component, you actually want to put the navigation inside the off-canvas body. So notice like I have the body section right here. I have my header with the button that turns things off. The body is the thing that actually has my navigation. And then you can just treat it like you normally would the navigation or the navbar nav. Just add it in there and you have yourself a cool little off-canvas navigation, quite possibly the coolest new Bootstrap feature. So let's see, what else do we have? So in addition to that, there are these new classes for placeholders. This was pretty interesting. So you have these classes that allow you to create, instead of text, a gray box. And it's meant to be whenever you are going to be loading some content on your page. So whenever you are looking to load something, this placeholder allows you to show a box instead of the actual content, and then you can replace it programmatically with additional content. You've seen that on LinkedIn and all kinds of other websites. When you load up a page, it has like placeholders, and then it turns the placeholder into some code. So I like this feature. It's pretty easy to create. What you do is you add, so here's the headline, and notice that it has this like loading button on it. So the headline, let's make this bigger. So we have the headline right here, an H1, and I can tell it how many columns out of the 12 column grid I want it to sort of take. So once it reloads, you'll see that it takes up less room. Now, if it is, so just like with regular columns, and this is kind of a new feature in Bootstrap, that you don't need to have rows for columns anymore. So you can actually make anything in Bootstrap adhere to a column of any size. So just like with regular columns, you'll notice that because I have like these two elements right here, and this one has takes up 6 units, and this one takes up 3 units, that because that's less than 12, it's putting them side by side. So if I said call 7, they would appear one on top of the other. So you just say placeholder. Also, if you don't put a column, I believe if you actually put in some content here, then because it is styled as a placeholder, then it'll still do the gray box, but it'll take up the room that that headline would normally take up. And so I guess once you load up the content, then you can get rid of these classes and it would just show the headline. So there it is. Super cool. So sort of a cute, you can also make them glow. So you can see that here's a version of one that is kind of glowing. There's actually a couple of animation effects. There's like a glow effect, and I can't remember the name of the other ones. There's like almost like a slide from side to side effect in addition to the glow. So that's pretty cool. That's another new feature. Let's see. All right, so this is another interesting one. It's one of those things that I didn't think that I need it. Like occasionally you'll get a feature that you're like, I don't know if I really needed that, right? But it's after you use it, you're like, oh yeah, I actually do like that. It's a way of, so these are called stacks. There's two versions, the H stack and the V stack, so horizontal and vertical stack. And then you can add a gap. So I think you can still see in this smaller version that you can see that I can add a gap here of a specific size. So that's how much room in between the elements. And this is sort of like like how CSS grid works. You can change these to whatever you want. And of course, if there's an H stack, it means that there's also a V stack. They do display full width, so you can see that they now appear on top of one another. But it's kind of a super, super quick way of creating a simple grid of items. And you can combine them together. So you can see that here I have another H stack with a gap of 2. And there's this interesting new little class that you can use for a vertical pipe that takes up the whole height of the element. And that one is the VR element. So think of, to remember this, just remember, normally you use an HR to create a horizontal line. So they just added a new element with a class of VR for vertical lines. So let's see, pretty cool. I like this one. This one, you don't think you're going to want it because, you can do the same thing with Flexbox, but it just helps you not have to type in as many classes as you would for a normal element. So let's see. I think let's take a look at the questions to see if there's any questions or comments. So let me see if we have any new comments. I see some questions in LinkedIn, but for some reason I can't highlight them. So somebody says, this is an amazing, informative show. Thank you. I appreciate that. I don't know. Let me try switching over. No, I don't see all the comments here. So sorry about that. So now I have another sort of demo that I want to show you. So this will be, and let me find the place. So I did all this. I don't see any other comments. And for some reason, LinkedIn is not pushing them. So I apologize for that. Also, just so you know, I did upgrade to a new version of, rather, I did upgrade all my networking. So hopefully you should not be hearing any networking issues. I put in a direct hard line onto my broadcasting studio down here. And so I'm off of Wi-Fi now to make sure that I have a clean connection. And I also updated my cable connection so that now I get like 20 gigs up. Surprisingly enough, and this is maybe something you want to check out, it was actually a free upgrade. So every once in a while, it looks like the different cable companies kind of update their systems, but they don't necessarily put you on the new plan. So if you haven't updated for a while, it might behoove you to give them a call and see if they have any new updates, because this update, so I went from, I think I was getting like 80 download at like 80 megabits per second download, and I think like maybe like from 5 to like 8 on a good day up, and it went to like 400 down and 20 up free. Wow. Make sure you call people every once in a while. It pays to do that. So next up, we'll take a look at a course I'm working on, and I'll give you some tips on how to create some shortcuts for Query Selector and Query Selector All. If you like the way the jQuery worked, then you can use the $ variable, just like with jQuery. So I've got a new series that I'm working on called JavaScript as a Second Language. I did a prototype of it a while back, so make sure you, so I'm going to give you a peek at how I write some of these things so that you can see how I do my work. So let me go ahead and show you that demo. I've got a new series that I'm working on called JavaScript as a Second Language, and I wanted to give you a peek at how I'm writing these. So if you look at what's over here, it's a markdown file in a radio style format so that I can communicate with producers how I want this thing to be displayed. And so I created a Photoshop file that has all these different screenshots. As part of creating this project, I decided to create this little sort of app, and I want to show you a trick that is a shortcut to Query Selector. So here I am in my repo with the code example, and I'm going to switch over to the before branch. So I hit the period. It's going to open up a code spaces with a code swing already installed. And in here, the app, of course, doesn't look quite as exciting as the previous app, but essentially every time you shear 3 sheep, it will add $10 using the modulus operator right here. Now, the interesting part that I wanted to show you is that I have all these document query selectors targeting different elements. So this one's targeting the button right here, this button. And then these other ones are targeting the count and the total. So sometimes the document query selector is a lot to type. And I really missed the way that in jQuery you could use the $sign variable. And you can recreate that by using the $sign as a variable in JavaScript. This is weird, but the $sign is an actual valid variable name in JavaScript along with the underscore. And what I can do here is set document query selector and go ahead and bind that at the document level. So I'm binding this $sign as sort of an alias to query selector. And if I wanted to, I can also do a double $sign and bind that to query selector all. Now that means that wherever I'm using document query selector, I can instead use the $sign and then target the element just like with jQuery. So this should work in exactly the same way, but it's a lot easier to read, especially on a document where you're using query selector often. Another thing that you can do with any GitHub repo is compare 2 of your branches. And this is pretty handy when you are creating a code demo. And all you have to do is switch the URL of the current repo and add the keyword compare at the end. Then you can compare the 2 branches by just naming them and separating them with 2 periods. And that gives you a diff of the 2, which means that you can send somebody a difference between 2 branches. And this helps you give a better presentation, especially when you have to do something like live coding. You know, whenever I do live coding, I actually use this trick. And actually, when I record any of my courses, this is exactly how I do it, because there's so much to type. And I tend to do a lot of courses where I type everything out. And you can see how that could, create some problems. Live coding is really difficult. So this is one way that I make that easier for myself, just by creating a diff. I use an app called Kaleidoscope locally, just because I need something local. I think that Visual Studio Code does a pretty decent job. Last week I talked about Git Lens. It actually lets you compare different branches. I do still like Kaleidoscope. It does seem to be a lot simpler. So all I do is set it as the default diff tool. And then I do like a diff, and then I call the branch, and then it shows me a screen just like that. What I like about the online version is that you can actually share it with somebody. So a lot of times you'll see in some of the courses where I'm actually showing you like a beginning and an ending version, and I can link to the changes that you need to make if you're following along. The biggest problem is that people following along, sometimes you miss a comma here and there. So one of the things that I do is, was I'm diffing, I can very quickly just do a save and then run the diff again, and then I can see exactly where my current copy differs from the copy that is in my sort of in the code that I'm supposed to be typing. So super handy. Hopefully that's a good tip. Next up, I found this amazing new thing. So as you know, like I have this section called the Toolbox Shorts, where I find like interesting things, and I just talk briefly about them. But every once in a while, I find something that's a completely new idea, and I think that I may have just found the next great thing for web development. Now, this is a CSS framework that lets you use JavaScript to build your CSS quicker. It's called Assembler CSS. And let's take a look, and let's see if I can show you the website. So here's what the website looks like. And I want to show you a little bit of how this works and how I think it can maybe replace, Tailwind CSS and Bootstrap. I think like whereas Tailwind CSS felt like the next version of Bootstrap, like what Bootstrap could have become if it kept going with some of, its move onto post CSS. I think that in the same way, And then, this feels like the next version of Tailwind CSS. So it's going to seem sort of weird in the same way if you use the Bootstrap and then you moved on to Tailwind. At first, it seems very weird. This is going to seem like even weirder, but hopefully it'll make sense, and you will hopefully like it. So check it out. So let's say that I wanted to try this new library called Assembler CSS. It looks pretty interesting. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start a new tab here. Just type in github.dev. And what I want to do is start a new code swing. And here I'll do an HTML, CSS, and JavaScript template. All right, so I want to see the two web pages side by side. So if you're on a Mac, you're going to like this tip. I'm going to get out of full screen mode here. And I'm going to split these different tabs into two windows. Then I can hover over this little button right here and then tile this window to the right of the screen. I'm going to show them side by side like this, and then I'll just click on this one. This is Mac's split view. So let's go ahead and change this layout here. I'm going to pull up the command palette and then choose change layout. And I'm going to split this at the bottom. This will put all of these sort of code tabs here at the bottom. I don't need the script tag, and that gives me a lot more real estate to see what I'm doing. So let's take a look at the documentation to see what we need to do here. To install this, I'm going to need this script call right here. So I'm going to copy this from this window, go into my code swing, and choose add library. This is going to be added as a script reference. And now I can take a look at the core concept section here. This library lets you take something that you would add into a style tag inside an element and express it in a different ways. So you can see here that we're doing exactly the same thing with an xstyle attribute instead. Let's go ahead and copy this code and just put it in where our HTML would go. You can see this square appear here. This might work better if our style section is at the bottom here. So let's just move that to the bottom. That's not too impressive, but they have these additional virtual properties that are written in the same way as CSS classes in Bootstrap and Tailwind CSS. So all that code right there, you can write by simply using something like this, and you get the same result. So the interesting thing is that you can also add CSS variables into your code. And to do that, you just create a root variable just like you would with a regular style sheet. So let's go ahead and add this primary color right here. And then you can use that as a variable in your content. So we can replace this background color here with our CSS variable. And the shortcut for that is the @ sign and then the name of the variable. Now that's a little bit more useful. One of the real powers of this framework is that you can combine these variables with all the built-in virtual properties. You can see that it has most of the properties that you would find in a normal CSS framework. There's also a set of preset values that you can use in your code. These are really custom variables. The nice thing is that it assumes that you're going to be changing these. Next up will be the concept of states. So just like Tailwind allows you to define different states for your properties, you can do that by adding a period into your styles. Let's say, for example, that we wanted to change the background color whenever somebody hovered over our button. Next up is the concept of scopes, and this is how you would get to something like a pseudoclass selector in CSS. To use them, you use the exclamation symbol. Next up would be media queries. These are handled by using the pipe character. Looks like I can't get quite to the Excel breakpoint at the screen size. Of course, it's super nice that you can convert all of your code into what's called a mixin. It's not pretty, but we can save what we've done so far into a mixin. What I'll do is I'll copy all this out. To use a mixin, you use a caret. It's above the 6. I'm just going to call this box. And then in our root, we'll create a variable called box, and then include the word mixin in here. Then in quotations, I'm just going to paste everything that I did, and I'll get rid of the carriage returns. And it looks like we can't use the reserved word box, so we'll change that to boxes to make this work. I don't know. That to me was amazing. So it felt, like I said, like the next version of something like Tailwind. I do like that everything is kind of closer to the style attribute. I have really come to appreciate how Tailwind just lets you do things that make the code more maintainable. I'm not sure how something like this will interface with something like React or Vue. I'm sure that is part of the approach, because what this is doing is just letting you do things in loading up all the styles as actually a JavaScript file. So to actually use this platform, you end up adding not a style tag like you would for a normal framework. You end up adding a script tag and loading up a piece of JavaScript, which also means that you can use it easily, like in a code swing or in CodePen, and start playing around with it. So if you want to, as I said, I have all these different links to everything, and I have this project called modular swing. If you wanted to get to my example of how to use the query selector and query selector all, and then I have this other code swing called assembler CSS swing. If you wanted to try these out, you can just go to the links and just hit the period, and you'll jump directly into a project that has been set up for you. And you can play around with these if you want. I'm really digging the way that Code Swing works with code spaces and the .dev shortcut. So that is assembler CSS. I'm so excited. I feel like this could be huge, and I don't know if I am one of the first people that found that. I know that I've seen it in other places, but the idea is so amazing that I just spent like a few hours playing around with it after I found it. It was so good. It was like a Toolbox short that just sucked me right in and cost me to spend like a couple of hours just messing around with things. All right. Other than that, let's see if there's any questions. Like, I apologize. It doesn't look like I can add them like I normally can for some reason. I don't want to reload my StreamYard because who knows what will happen there. But I don't see any questions. Oh yeah, the code. Oh, the looks like sometimes the somebody saying that the code canvas, it looks a little blurry, so you may want to try the YouTube live stream. So I simulcast this on LinkedIn, and then it also goes onto YouTube and one more other place, I think Twitch. So maybe check those streams out. I really don't think it's me. From last week, I made sure that I actually have a new Mac Mini, which is fantastic, one of those M1 Mac Minis. I had somebody come in and put a hardwired connection to the router, so I'm hardwired in, and I'm getting a much faster internet, so it shouldn't be me. I think sometimes the stream has to go into like StreamYard, and then it has to go into LinkedIn and YouTube, and sometimes it creates a little bit of a problem. Also, all of these are going to be published on my site, and I recorded the two demos, the query selector all, as well as the assembler CSS, as separate items. So they should appear on my feed on LinkedIn or in my YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/planet of the web, if you want to find that. Other than that, I don't really see any more questions. Looks like we're 43 minutes in. The last thing is, if you want to know what I am working on next, I have a newsletter that I publish usually every Thursday. It just depends on how busy I am. This week I'm going to be away from like a web connection on Thursday, so I don't know when it's going to come out. But I created this newsletter on LinkedIn called Apply, and it's a play on words. So you get it like apply, like call and apply in JavaScript. It's a very nerdy joke. So far I've written, it's got like almost 15,000 subscribers. I've done 28 editions, and it's a little bit of a different sort of take. So usually I talk about some topic that I'm thinking about. So I love sci-fi movies, and I found this great movie, which I think is the first instance of the time loop in sci-fi. So that last week I was talking about that, and really what prompted this was that I was thinking about a course that I just launched called Learning Git and GitHub, that it deals, it approaches Git and GitHub as you having a multiverse time machine that you can use to go back and change the history and document the history of your project as well. So I usually post in here, um, you know, I'll post this episode of the Toolbox, and then I will definitely, hopefully by the time I get it, let me say, hopefully by the time I get it out, I'll have a topic. I don't know. Let me know also, like, if you enjoyed some of the things that I'm showing. If you have any ideas for what you want me to show on these streamcasts, I would really appreciate it if you sort of let me know. I don't see any other comments anywhere, so I would love to have you, comment on things and let me know what type of things you'd like me to cover. I really enjoy doing these, so hopefully we'll see you again soon next week. It should be next Wednesday on the next episode.